A quiet waitress in a high-end restaurant is treated like she's invisible, until a powerful and dangerous man singles her out, humiliating her in front of everyone. He assumes she's just another server who won't understand him, especially when he switches to a foreign language to mock her. But in one unexpected moment, she responds. Fluently. Precisely. And not only does she understand him, she corrects him. What was meant to embarrass her instantly flips, exposing his ignorance in front of his own men. The room goes silent. Power shifts. And for the first time, the man who controls everything loses control. But that moment comes with consequences. What should have ended as a simple exchange turns into something far more dangerous. He becomes suspicious. She becomes a target. And what no one realizes is, this wasn't luck. She has a past. A hidden identity. And that single moment of defiance sets off a chain reaction that pulls both of them into a much bigger game, one involving secrets, investigations, and a carefully planned takedown. As the story unfolds, the balance of power continues to shift, until the final reveal changes everything. Because the waitress he underestimated was never just a waitress. Subscribed, like, share and comment. Watch till the end to discover what happened to Zora the waitress. Serve them and stay quiet. He didn't even look at her when he said it. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. In a room like this, where money spoke in whispers and power never raised its voice, commands like that carried weight. Final. Absolute. Around the table, his associates chuckled under their breath, the kind of quiet amusement reserved for people who knew exactly how far his authority stretched. No one questioned him. No one ever did. To them, she wasn't a person. Just a uniform. A pair of hands. Someone meant to move silently between tables, refill glasses, and disappear before anyone had to acknowledge her existence. And she played the part perfectly. Head slightly lowered. Expression neutral. Movements precise. Invisible. At least, that's what they thought. Because what no one in that room knew, what the man at the center of it all hadn't even considered, was that the quiet ones weren't always powerless. Sometimes, they were just waiting. Waiting for the right moment. The right words. The right mistake. And he had just made one. For a brief second, she didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't react. The silence stretched just long enough to make it uncomfortable, but not long enough to draw attention. Then she lifted her gaze. And when she finally opened her mouth, everything changed. Because her reply didn't just answer him. It exposed him. And in a room full of powerful men who feared only one thing, the truth was the most dangerous sound of all. But her reply silenced the entire room. The restaurant was the kind of place people didn't simply walk into. They arrived with quiet certainty, stepping out of polished black cars into a world that already knew their names. Inside, the air carried the scent of grilled premium beef, sesame oil, and something older, something expensive. Soft jazz drifted through the dim golden lighting, wrapping itself around whispered conversations and calculated smiles. Every surface gleamed, dark wood, glass, lacquered panels, each detail carefully chosen to signal wealth without saying it aloud. This wasn't just a place to eat. It was where power gathered, where influence sat at tables and spoke in low voices. The staff moved like a silent system beneath it all, invisible but essential. Every step was measured, every motion practiced. No one rushed, but nothing was ever delayed. Glasses were refilled before they emptied, plates cleared before they cluttered. It was choreography disguised as service. At the front, the host bowed with subtle precision, while deeper inside, servers communicated with nothing more than glances and timing. In a place like this, perfection wasn't praised. It was expected. And anything less didn't earn correction. It earned consequence, quiet but lasting. Zora moved through that system as if she had always belonged to it. Her posture was straight, her step steady, her expression neutral in a way that revealed nothing and invited nothing. She balanced trays effortlessly, adjusting details others wouldn't notice. A glass slightly misaligned. A napkin folded just a fraction off. She fixed them all without drawing attention. To anyone watching, she was just another server, efficient, quiet, forgettable. Exactly what the room required her to be. But Zora noticed everything. She saw the tension behind polite smiles, the impatience in tapping fingers, the subtle hierarchies at every table. Who spoke first? Who interrupted? Who stayed silent? Power revealed itself in small ways, and she read them all without effort. It wasn't something she tried to do. It simply happened. Like breathing. Like instinct. And in a place like this, where everything was controlled, those small details mattered more than anything spoken aloud. Move faster, Zora. Mr. Han's voice cut in softly but sharply. He stood near the service station, his eyes constantly scanning the room, his fingers fidgeting against each other. Stress clung to him tonight more than usual. It showed in the tightness of his jaw, the way his gaze flicked toward the entrance every few seconds. He wasn't just managing the room. He was waiting for something. "Yes, sir," she replied calmly, already moving. He didn't respond. He rarely did. Because tonight, fear had settled into the restaurant like an uninvited guest. It moved quietly between the staff, carried in hushed voices and unfinished sentences. A name passed from one person to another, never fully spoken, always understood. Zora caught fragments of it in passing, felt the shift in energy each time it surfaced. Shoulders stiffened. Conversations shortened. Even the most experienced servers moved with sharper precision, as if mistakes had suddenly become more dangerous. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. In places like this, you learned quickly that answers weren't always given. Sometimes, they were felt long before they were explained. In the back hallway, the illusion of calm dissolved into controlled chaos. Plates clattered, orders were called out in quick bursts, and movement filled every corner. Zora stepped into it seamlessly, picking up a tray without hesitation. Her hands remained steady despite the urgency around her. She had learned how to exist inside pressure without letting it show. It was one of the few things she still had control over. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Once. Then again. She ignored it at first, focusing on the tray in front of her. But when it buzzed a third time, she paused just long enough to check. 3 missed calls. The same number. Her chest tightened slightly, not from surprise, but from confirmation. She didn't need to answer. She already knew what it meant. Hospital. Bills. Another reminder that time wasn't on her side. For a moment, the noise around her faded. The urgency, the pressure, the endless motion, it all blurred as something heavier settled in its place. Reality. Her mother's condition wasn't improving. Treatments were becoming more expensive. Insurance had long since stopped covering what mattered. And her brother. He was still in school, still trying, still believing things would work out. Zora made sure he stayed there. She worked so he wouldn't have to stop. She carried the weight so he could move forward. Her phone buzzed once more. She silenced it this time, slipping it back into her pocket. Her expression reset instantly, calm returning like it had never left. That was the part no one saw. The shift. The decision. The quiet acceptance that she would keep going, no matter what it cost her. She picked up the tray again and stepped back into the dining room. Everything fell into place immediately. The lighting, the silence, the expectations. She moved between tables with the same controlled grace, responding to subtle gestures before they turned into requests. She remained invisible, just as she was supposed to be. But her mind never stopped working. Every detail registered. Every tone, every glance, every word spoken just a little too carefully. It was exhausting sometimes, pretending not to understand, pretending not to hear, pretending not to see. But she did it anyway. Because here, knowledge wasn't power. Here, knowledge was risk. And the less people believed you knew, the safer you were. Zora slowed briefly near the VIP section, adjusting a glass that didn't need adjusting. The space was prepared, perfect, waiting. The tension there felt different, sharper, heavier. Whatever was coming, it wasn't ordinary. Even Mr. Han had positioned himself closer to the entrance now, his posture tight, his focus unbroken. Everyone was waiting. And then the doors opened. The shift in the room was immediate. Conversation softened, movement slowed, and attention turned without appearing to. It wasn't obvious, but it was undeniable. Presence like that didn't need introduction. It announced itself in silence, in tension, in the way the air seemed to tighten around it. Zora didn't look up right away. She didn't need to. She could feel it. The kind of presence that didn't demand attention but took it anyway. The kind that changed rooms without speaking. She straightened slightly, her grip on the tray steady, her expression unchanged. Ready. Because whatever had just entered, she would serve them. Quietly. Perfectly. Invisible. At least, that's what everyone believed. Because what nobody in that room knew, what none of them had even begun to suspect, was that Zora wasn't just a waitress. The doors didn't slam open. They didn't need to. They opened slowly, almost quietly, but the effect was immediate. The entire restaurant shifted. It was subtle at first. A pause in conversation. A hesitation in movement. A server stopping mid-step before quickly correcting themselves. The kind of reaction that only happened when something, or someone, entered the room with a presence that couldn't be ignored. Zora felt it before she saw him. A pressure in the air. Heavy. Controlled. Dangerous. Then he stepped inside. He didn't rush. Didn't look around in curiosity or hesitation. He walked in like a man who already owned everything he saw. His suit was perfectly tailored, dark and sharp, every line precise. The kind of suit that didn't just signal wealth, it signaled power. Real power. The kind that didn't need to be explained. Two men followed closely behind him. Not bodyguards. Not exactly. But they moved like men who understood violence and carried it easily. The host at the front straightened instantly, his practiced smile tightening just slightly as he bowed deeper than he had all night. "Welcome, sir," he said, voice carefully controlled. The man didn't respond. didn't even look at him. He simply kept walking. That was enough. Mr. Han appeared almost immediately, moving faster than Zora had ever seen him move. The usual tension in his face had sharpened into something closer to fear. He bowed as well, lower than necessary, his voice suddenly eager. "Sir, your table is ready. We've prepared everything exactly as requested." Still, no response. Just a small nod. But that nod carried more authority than anything else in the room. Zora watched from a distance, her hand steady on the tray, her expression unchanged. But her eyes followed him carefully, quietly observing. Every step he took seemed deliberate, measured, controlled. The room adjusted itself around him without being told. Conversations lowered. Laughter disappeared. Even the sound of cutlery seemed softer, as if the restaurant itself understood the shift in power. He moved toward the VIP section without hesitation. Of course, that space hadn't been empty by accident. It had been waiting. As he reached the table, one of the men behind him pulled out his chair. He sat without acknowledgement, adjusting his cuff slightly as if everything else happening around him was irrelevant. Because to him, it was. Mr. Han hovered nearby, waiting, watching, ready to respond to even the smallest gesture. His usual authority over the staff had vanished completely, replaced by something much smaller. Submission. Zora turned slightly, continuing her route through the tables, but her attention didn't leave him. She didn't need to hear the whispers. She could already feel what they carried. But they came anyway. Quiet. Careful. Almost hidden. "That's him. Don't look too long. I heard what happened last time." The fragments passed between servers like fragile glass, each one handled with caution. Zora caught pieces as she moved. Enough to understand. He wasn't just wealthy. He wasn't just important. He was dangerous. The kind of man whose reputation wasn't built on business deals alone. The kind that came with stories people didn't tell directly, only hinted at. Stories about people who crossed him and disappeared. Businesses that refused him and didn't last long after. Problems that solved themselves the moment his name was mentioned. Power like that didn't stay hidden. It lingered in the air around him. And everyone in that room felt it. Zora approached another table, refilling a glass with steady hands. Her movements remained smooth, precise. To anyone watching, nothing had changed. But inside, she was already calculating, observing, listening. Because men like him didn't just exist in rooms like this. They controlled them. And control always came with patterns. As she stepped away, her eyes flicked briefly toward the VIP section again. He was speaking now. Quietly. His voice low enough that it didn't carry far, but the men around him leaned in slightly, their attention fixed. Not relaxed. Not casual. Careful. Respectful. Even they knew their place. One of them laughed softly at something he said, but it wasn't real laughter. It was measured. Controlled. The kind of reaction given not because something was funny, but because it was expected. Zora noticed the detail immediately. Power didn't just silence people. It shaped how they responded. Mr. Han moved closer to the table again, speaking in a low voice, likely confirming orders, making sure everything was perfect. His usual sharpness had disappeared completely. Every movement he made now was cautious, deliberate, almost rehearsed. Fear had replaced control. And it showed. Zora adjusted her grip on the tray slightly as she turned, continuing her route. But something had shifted. Not just in the room. In him. Because as he leaned back slightly in his chair, his gaze moved. Slowly. Deliberately. Scanning. Not the room as a whole, but the people inside it. Evaluating. Choosing. His eyes passed over the other tables without interest. Over the guests, the staff, the movement. Nothing held his attention for long. Until they stopped. For just a second. On her. Zora didn't react. Didn't hesitate. Didn't break stride. But she felt it. That brief moment of focus. Of recognition. Not as a person. But as something else. Something smaller. Something useful. His gaze lingered just long enough to make the intention clear. Then it moved on. Like the decision had already been made. Zora continued walking, her expression unchanged, her posture steady. But inside, something tightened. Because she understood that look. She had seen it before. Not here. Not in this life. But somewhere else. A long time ago. And it always meant the same thing. He wasn't just observing. He was selecting. And without saying a single word. Without needing to. He had already chosen his target. Zora didn't look back at him. Not immediately. In a place like this, attention was a currency, and giving it too freely could cost more than it seemed. So she continued her route, steady and precise, delivering plates, refilling glasses, adjusting details no one else noticed. But she felt it. That shift. That quiet, deliberate focus settling on her again. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't interest. It was intent. Server. The word cut through the room, not loud, not sharp, but unmistakably directed. Zora turned smoothly, her expression already neutral, her posture composed as she approached the VIP table. Up close, the atmosphere felt heavier, denser. His associates fell silent as she stepped in, their eyes flicking between her and him with something close to anticipation. Not surprise. Not concern. Expectation. They knew what was coming. Zora stopped at the appropriate distance, hands lightly clasped in front of her. "Good evening, sir. How may I assist you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back slightly in his chair, his gaze moving over her with slow, deliberate assessment. Not as a person, but as something to be measured. Dismissed. Used. "You're new," he said finally. His voice was calm. Controlled. But there was something beneath it, something that didn't need to be loud to feel dangerous. "No, sir," Zora replied softly. "I've been here for some time." A faint smile touched his lips. Not amused. Not kind. Just aware. "Is that so?" He glanced briefly at the men beside him, then back at her. "Strange. I don't remember seeing you." The implication was clear. If he hadn't noticed her before, she wasn't worth remembering. One of the men at the table let out a quiet chuckle. Zora didn't react. Didn't shift. Didn't defend herself. "I try to do my job well, sir." Another smile. This one slightly sharper. "That's good," he said. "Then you should be able to follow simple instructions." He leaned forward just slightly, resting his elbow on the table. Serve them, he added, gesturing lazily toward his associates. A pause. Just long enough to settle the weight of what came next. And stay quiet. The words landed exactly as intended. Not just an instruction. A dismissal. A reminder of place. Behind her, Zora could feel it, the subtle shift in the room. Conversations hadn't stopped, but they had changed. Slowed. Thinned. People weren't watching directly, but they were listening. Always listening. Zora inclined her head slightly. Of course, sir. She moved to begin service, reaching for the first glass with steady hands. But he wasn't finished. Wait. The word stopped her mid-motion. Zora turned back, her expression unchanged. He watched her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly as if reconsidering something. Then he spoke again. But this time, not in English. The shift was immediate. His tone changed. Faster. Sharper. The words came in Korean, fluid, confident, layered with a dialect that carried weight beyond simple meaning. His associates leaned in slightly, their attention sharpening. They understood. And more importantly, they assumed she didn't. Zora remained still, listening. Every word clear, every nuance precise. But she gave nothing away. His voice continued, now laced with something more deliberate. Something crafted. You don't understand this, do you? He said in Korean, his tone almost conversational. Good. Makes it easier. A quiet ripple of amusement moved around the table. She looks like the type, one of the men added in the same language. Smile, nod, and pretend. Another chuckle. Zora kept her gaze steady, her posture unchanged. Invisible. That's what they believed. He continued, his voice lowering slightly, the words becoming more specific. More pointed. I want something very particular tonight, he said, still in Korean. And I doubt she could even repeat it properly. His lips curved again, that same controlled, deliberate expression. Let's see how far her training really goes. The men at the table watched closely now. This wasn't just conversation anymore. It was a performance. And Zora was the stage. She could feel the weight of it pressing in from all sides. The expectations. The assumptions. The quiet certainty that she would fail. That she would hesitate. That she would reveal exactly what they believed her to be. Small. Unaware. Limited. Zora lowered her gaze slightly, just enough to maintain the role. Her heart remained steady, but her mind was moving fast. Because this wasn't just about the moment. This was about what came after. If she responded, she risked everything. Her job, her income, her stability, her mother's treatment, her brother's future. If she stayed silent, she kept those things, but she lost something else. Something harder to rebuild. Dignity. Respect. Self. The room felt smaller now. Tighter. Every second stretching longer than it should. He finished speaking, his words hanging in the air like a challenge. Then he leaned back again, folding his arms. Waiting. Watching. Confident. Because in his mind, the outcome was already decided. Zora didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't react. The silence settled. Heavy. Uncomfortable. But controlled. Then 1 second passed. Then 2. Then 3. For 3 seconds, she said nothing. 3 seconds where the room held its breath. 3 seconds where every possibility existed at once. 3 seconds where she stood between survival and something else entirely. Her grip tightened slightly on the edge of the tray. Not enough for anyone to notice. Just enough for her to feel it. Because in that moment, she understood something clearly. This wasn't just a test. It was a line. And whichever side she chose, there was no going back. Her gaze lifted slowly, meeting his. Not challenging. Not submissive. Just steady. The kind of look that didn't belong to someone who didn't understand. Something flickered in his expression. Brief. Almost imperceptible. But it was there. Zora inhaled quietly. The weight of everything, her family, her job, her future, pressed against that single moment. Balanced. Waiting. And then, she made a decision. Zora's gaze didn't waver. For a moment, the room still expected her to play her role, to nod politely, to apologize, to admit she didn't understand. To stay small. Instead, she spoke. And she spoke in Korean. Not the careful, textbook version most foreigners learned. Not the slow, deliberate phrasing meant to prove effort. No. She answered in the same dialect he had used. Fluent. Precise. Effortless. The shift was immediate. If you'd like that prepared properly, she said calmly, her tone matching his earlier cadence, you should clarify your instructions. What you described isn't traditional. It's a modern variation, and not a very good one. The words landed softly, but the impact was immediate. One of the men at the table froze, his glass halfway to his lips. Another blinked rapidly, his smirk collapsing into something uncertain. The quiet amusement that had filled the table just seconds ago disappeared completely, replaced by something sharper. Confusion. Zora didn't stop. If you're asking for authenticity, she continued, her voice steady, then you'd want the preparation done differently. Otherwise, you're just repeating something you heard without understanding it. There was no insult in her tone. No aggression. Just clarity. And that made it worse. Because she wasn't attacking him. She was correcting him. Silence spread outward from the table like a ripple in still water. Even the surrounding conversations faltered, fading just enough to make the shift noticeable. Zora adjusted the tray slightly in her hands, her posture unchanged. Controlled. Composed. Completely unbothered. And then she added, almost casually, "And if you're going to test someone, sir, you should at least be sure of your own answers first." That was the moment everything broke. The man on his right lowered his gaze instantly, his earlier confidence gone. Another leaned back slightly, as if distancing himself from the tension that had suddenly filled the space. No one laughed now. No one moved. Because they understood what had just happened. Zora hadn't just understood him. She had exposed him. The room felt different now. Heavier. Charged. Zora finally met his eyes fully, holding the gaze without hesitation. Not challenging. Not submissive. Equal. And that was the real disruption. Because men like him didn't expect equality. They expected control. For the first time since he had entered the restaurant, his expression shifted. It was subtle. A tightening of the jaw. A flicker in his eyes. Something sharp replacing the calm certainty that had defined him until now. He hadn't expected this. Not from her. Not from anyone in this room. Certainly not from someone he had already dismissed. "You understand me," he said slowly, switching back to English. It wasn't a question. Zora inclined her head slightly. "Yes, sir." The simplicity of the answer carried more weight than anything else she could have said, because it confirmed everything. Not just that she understood, but that she had always understood. Every word, every assumption, every insult. And she had chosen her moment. Chosen it carefully. The realization settled in. Not just for him, but for everyone watching. The power dynamic had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. She was no longer the one being evaluated. He was. Zora turned slightly, reaching for the bottle on her tray with calm precision. "If you'd like," she said, her tone returning to professional neutrality, "I can recommend something that actually matches what you were trying to order." The offer was polite, respectful, perfectly appropriate. And yet, it landed like a final statement, because it left him with only two options. Accept it, and admit she was right, or reject it, and confirm everything she had just implied. He didn't respond immediately. For the first time since he had arrived, he hesitated. Just slightly. But enough. Zora waited, her posture steady, her expression unreadable. The room waited with her. No one spoke. No one moved. Because something had changed. Something that couldn't be undone. He leaned back slowly, his eyes still fixed on her. Studying. Reassessing. Not as a server. But as something else entirely. Something unexpected. Something dangerous. And in that moment, in the quiet space between what he thought he controlled and what he clearly didn't, the truth settled in. Cold. Unavoidable. And sharper than anything she had said. Because for the first time, he wasn't the one in control. And that's when he realized he had made a mistake. The silence didn't last. It snapped. Not loudly, but sharply enough to cut through everything that had just happened. His chair shifted slightly as he leaned forward, the movement controlled but no longer relaxed. The calm authority he had carried into the room hadn't disappeared. It had changed. Hardened. "You think that was clever?" he asked. His voice was still low, still measured, but there was something underneath now. Something colder. Less patient. Zora didn't answer. Didn't need to. Because this was no longer about the words she had spoken. It was about what they meant. His gaze sharpened, locking onto her with renewed intensity. "Where did you learn that?" he continued, switching briefly back into Korean, faster this time. "That dialect. Those references." He paused, watching her carefully. "You don't pick that up serving tables." The accusation hung in the air. Not spoken outright, but clear. One of the men beside him shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them. Another reached for his glass but didn't drink, his hand hovering uncertainly. They felt it too. The shift. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was something else. Zora remained still, her posture unchanged, her expression neutral. "Training, sir," she replied calmly. "I studied languages." The answer was simple. Too simple. And that made it worse. Because it didn't satisfy him. It confirmed his suspicion. His eyes narrowed. "Languages," he repeated, as if testing the word. Then he leaned back slightly, his fingers tapping once against the table. A signal. Subtle, but immediate. One of the men behind him stepped closer, his presence shifting from passive to alert. "Find out where she studied," he said quietly, still watching Zora. "Who taught her? Where she worked before this." The instruction was calm, efficient, like something he had done many times before. Zora felt it then. Not fear. Not yet. But awareness. Because this was the moment the situation changed. What had started as humiliation had become suspicion. And suspicion, in a room like this, was dangerous. "Sir," Mr. Han's voice broke in suddenly, strained and tight. He had moved closer without anyone noticing, his face pale, his posture rigid. The confidence he usually carried as the restaurant owner had vanished completely. "She's one of our best staff," he said quickly. "Very reliable. No issues. I can assure you. I didn't ask for your assurance." The interruption was quiet, but final. Mr. Han stopped instantly, his words cut off mid-sentence. Zora saw it clearly. The shift in hierarchy. In this room, Mr. Han wasn't in charge. He never had been. The boss's attention returned to Zora, his gaze colder now. "You understand what I'm saying," he said. "So you understand the problem." Zora met his eyes briefly. "Yes, sir." The acknowledgement didn't help. It confirmed everything. He stood then. Slowly. Deliberately. The movement alone was enough to draw attention from across the room. Conversations that had cautiously resumed fell silent again. The tension, which had begun to ease, snapped back into place. "People who know things they shouldn't," he said, his voice carrying just enough to reach beyond the table, "tend to become problems." No one moved. No one spoke. Because everyone understood. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was a warning. Zora felt the weight of it settle over the room. Over her. But she didn't step back. Didn't react. Because reacting now would only confirm what he already believed. Instead, she held her position, calm, controlled, steady. The same way she had from the beginning. That, more than anything, seemed to irritate him. His jaw tightened slightly, his gaze flicking briefly toward Mr. Han. "Remove her," he said. 2 words. Simple. Absolute. Mr. Han hesitated. Just for a second. Long enough to reveal the conflict. Then he nodded quickly. "Of course," he said, his voice tight. Immediately. Zora turned before anyone could touch her. Not out of submission, but control. If she was leaving, she would do it on her own terms. The room parted subtly as she walked, the invisible barrier between staff and guests becoming more pronounced. No one looked at her directly, but she could feel it, the attention, the curiosity, the quiet judgment. The weight of being seen. For the wrong reasons. Behind her, the low murmur of conversation began to return, hesitant at first, then growing slightly as people tried to pretend the moment had passed. But it hadn't. Not really. Mr. Han caught up to her near the hallway, his voice dropping to a strained whisper. "What were you thinking?" he asked, his eyes wide with panic. "Do you know who that is?" Zora didn't answer. Because she did. Go to the office, he continued quickly. Now. Don't speak to anyone. Don't, just go. His fear was real. Not for himself alone. For the restaurant. For everything connected to it. Zora nodded once. Then kept walking. Behind her, she could still feel it. His attention. Not gone. Not dismissed. Focused. Calculating. Because this wasn't finished. Not even close. As she reached the end of the hallway, the noise of the restaurant fading behind her, one thought settled in with quiet certainty. This wasn't about a mistake anymore. It was about interest. And interest like his never ended simply. This wasn't over. The hallway outside the dining room felt different. Quieter. But not calmer. The noise of clinking glasses and low conversations faded behind Zora as she walked, replaced by something heavier. The kind of silence that didn't comfort, it pressed in. Each step toward the office felt longer than it should. Not because she was afraid, but because she understood what came next. Jobs like this didn't survive moments like that. People like him didn't forget them. Zora stepped into the small office and closed the door behind her. The space was cramped, cluttered with paperwork, invoices, and a computer that hummed softly in the corner. It smelled faintly of old coffee and stress. She set the tray down carefully, exhaled once, then reached for her phone. For missed calls now. Same number. She stared at the screen for a second longer this time, her jaw tightening just slightly. Reality didn't wait. It didn't pause for moments of pride or decisions made in heated silence. It kept moving, demanding, unforgiving. Zora lowered the phone slowly, placing it on the desk instead of calling back. Because right now, she didn't know what she would say. A soft knock came at the door. Not urgent. Not hesitant. Measured. Zora turned slightly, her expression already resetting. "Come in," she said. The door opened. But it wasn't Mr. Hahn. An older man stepped inside, closing the door behind him with quiet precision. His presence filled the room immediately, not in the same way as the man outside, not with pressure or threat, but with something steadier. Controlled. Deliberate. He wore a dark suit, understated but undeniably expensive. His posture was straight, his movements economical. There was no wasted energy in him. And his eyes. Sharp. Observant. Familiar in a way Zora couldn't place immediately. They studied her for a moment. Not with suspicion. With recognition. "You handled that well," he said calmly. His Korean was precise. Clean. Not regional. Refined. Zora didn't respond right away. Her mind was already moving, searching, placing details. "You understood everything he said," the man continued. "Not just the language. The intent." Zora met his gaze carefully. "Yes," she said. The man nodded once, as if confirming something he already knew. "I thought so." He stepped further into the room, his attention never leaving her. "You've been pretending," he added. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. Zora held his gaze. "People see what they expect to see," she replied. A faint smile touched his lips. "Exactly." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small card, placing it gently on the desk between them. Zora glanced down. No company logo. No title. Just a name. And a number. She didn't pick it up. Not yet. 3 years ago, the man said, his tone shifting slightly, there was an incident involving a diplomatic team in Seoul. A leak. Sensitive information compromised during negotiations. Zora's expression didn't change. But something inside her stilled. The man watched her closely. You were there, he continued. Junior analyst. Linguistics specialist. Fast-tracked. Promising. A pause. Then suddenly, gone. The words landed quietly. But they carried weight. Zora's fingers curled slightly at her side. You've done your research, she said. I don't need to research what I already know, he replied. Another pause. Then, you were made a scapegoat. This time, the silence stretched longer. Because this wasn't speculation. It was truth. Zora looked at him fully now. Not as a stranger, but as someone who understood more than he should. It wasn't your fault, he added. But you were convenient. Her jaw tightened slightly. Not in anger. In restraint. Because hearing it said out loud didn't change anything. It didn't undo what had happened. The investigations. The quiet dismissal. The doors that closed without explanation. The career that ended before it truly began. You adapted, the man said, glancing briefly around the office. Survived. Stayed quiet. His gaze returned to her. But not invisible. Zora said nothing. Because there was nothing to deny. The man exhaled slowly, then shifted slightly, his tone becoming more direct. The man outside, he said, is not just a businessman. Zora almost smiled. I know. I imagine you do, he replied. What you may not know is that he's already under investigation. That got her attention. Not visibly, but internally. Multiple agencies, the man continued. Different countries. Different interests. But the same conclusion. A brief pause. He's careless. Zora's mind moved quickly now. Connecting. Calculating. And tonight, she asked. You confirmed something, the man said. Not just that you understand him, but that you understand his world. Another pause. People like that don't tolerate uncertainty. Zora glanced briefly toward the door. He's already looking into me. Yes, the man said simply. He is. Silence settled again. But it felt different now. Focused. Purposeful. The man gestured lightly toward the card on the desk. We need someone who can move between both sides, he said. Someone who understands language, culture, behavior, and knows when to stay silent. Zora looked at the card again, then back at him. And in return, she asked. Protection, he said. A beat. Resources. Another. And the chance to reclaim what was taken from you. The offer wasn't rushed. It didn't need to be. Because it wasn't just opportunity. It was restoration. Zora studied him for a long moment. Weighing. Measuring. Not the offer. The man. Because offers like this always came with cost. And if I refuse, she asked. He didn't hesitate. Then you walk out that door, he said, and deal with him alone. No threat. Just truth. Zora exhaled slowly, her gaze dropping to the card once more. Her reflection stared back faintly from its surface. For 3 years, she had been surviving, adapting, hiding. No. Everything was shifting. Again. She reached forward, picked up the card. The man nodded once, satisfied. "Good," he said. Then he turned toward the door, pausing just before opening it. Without looking back, he added, "By morning, everything would change." Weeks passed, then months, and everything about Zora's life changed, but not in ways anyone from that restaurant would recognize. The quiet waitress who once moved unseen between tables was gone. In her place stood someone sharper, more deliberate, more in control. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was built slowly, through long hours, precise training, and decisions that demanded more than just intelligence. They demanded discipline. Zora adapted quickly, faster than expected. The same instincts that once helped her read customers and anticipate tension now worked on a different level. Rooms were no longer about service, they were about strategy. Conversations weren't just overheard, they were analyzed. Every word, every pause, every glance carried meaning. And she understood all of it. Her posture changed first. Subtle, but noticeable. No longer shaped by the need to appear small, but by the awareness that she didn't have to. Her voice followed, still calm, still controlled, but now carrying authority beneath its softness. People listened when she spoke, even when she said very little. The card she had picked up that night had opened doors she thought were permanently closed. Access, information, protection, resources that didn't just stabilize her life, but elevated it. Her mother's treatments were no longer uncertain. Her brother stayed in school without interruption. For the first time in years, survival wasn't the only goal. No. There was purpose. But while Zora moved forward, someone else was beginning to lose control. The man from that night hadn't forgotten. He couldn't. What had started as a moment of irritation had turned into something far more dangerous: uncertainty. And uncertainty was something he didn't tolerate. At first, his response was controlled. Quiet. He ordered background checks, pulled records, searched for inconsistencies. But the deeper he looked, the less he found. Zora's past had been cleaned, not erased, but carefully obscured. That alone was a problem. Because people like her didn't just disappear from records unless someone wanted them to. And that meant one thing. She wasn't alone. The realization unsettled him more than the confrontation itself ever had. He became more cautious, more aggressive. Meetings shifted locations more frequently. Conversations became shorter, more guarded. Even the people closest to him noticed the change, but no one questioned it. They adapted, because that's what people did around him. But beneath that control, something else was growing. Pressure. From outside. From forces he couldn't immediately identify. Deals began to stall. Partners became hesitant. Information started slipping through cracks that shouldn't exist. Small things at first, then bigger ones. Patterns he couldn't ignore. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't ahead of the situation. He was reacting to it. And he didn't like that. Not at all. Late one evening, he sat alone in his office, the city lights stretching out beyond the glass walls. Reports lay scattered across his desk, each one raising more questions than answers. His phone buzzed. Once. Then again. He glanced at it, irritation flashing briefly across his face before he picked it up. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Almost. But something, instinct, maybe, made him answer. He didn't speak first. He waited. And when the voice finally came through, it was calm, controlled, familiar in a way that immediately set something off in his mind. A single message. Clear. Direct. No room for misunderstanding. Then the line went dead. He stared at the phone for a moment longer, his expression tightening slightly. Not anger. Not yet. Recognition. Because this wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. This was deliberate. Calculated. And for the first time since that night, he understood. This wasn't about a waitress anymore. This was something else entirely. Something bigger. Something organized. His grip on the phone tightened just slightly. Because now, the game had changed. And he wasn't the one setting the rules anymore. He looked down at the message again. Read it once. Then twice. And the meaning settled in. Cold. Unavoidable. Then he received a summons. The building didn't look intimidating. That was the point. Clean glass. Neutral colors. Quiet security. No visible signs of authority. Only the kind that didn't need to be announced. But the moment he stepped inside, he felt it. Control. Not his. The receptionist didn't bow. Didn't rush. She simply acknowledged him with a measured nod and gestured toward the elevator. They're expecting you. No name. No title. Just certainty. He said nothing as the doors closed behind him, his reflection staring back from the polished steel. Composed. Untouched. At least on the surface. But beneath that, calculation. Because he understood now. This wasn't a meeting. It was a move. The elevator opened onto a quiet floor, far removed from the noise of the city below. The hallway was wide, minimal, lined with doors that revealed nothing about what lay behind them. At the end, one door stood slightly open. Waiting. He stepped inside without hesitation. And stopped. The room was larger than expected, but stripped of anything unnecessary. A long table. A few chairs. Screens along the wall displaying documents, numbers, timelines. Evidence. People were already seated. Not many. But enough. Men and women in dark suits, their attention shifting toward him as he entered. Not with fear. Not with respect. Assessment. He recognized none of them. And that alone told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't his world. At the head of the table, someone sat with their back partially turned. Still. Composed. Waiting. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Then, she turned. Zora. No uniform. No lowered gaze. No silence. She wore a tailored suit, simple but precise, her posture straight, her presence steady. The same calm expression rested on her face, but now it carried something different. Authority. The shift was absolute. For the first time since he had known her, he had no control over the situation. But he didn't show it. He stepped forward, his voice measured. So, he said. "This is where you've been hiding." Zora didn't react to the tone, didn't acknowledge the implication. "Please," she said calmly, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Have a seat." It wasn't a suggestion. He held her gaze for a second longer, then sat. Not because he was told to, but because standing would have changed nothing. Silence settled briefly as one of the individuals at the table tapped a screen. The displays behind them shifted, files opening, images appearing, timelines aligning. Transactions, names, locations, connections that stretched further than the room itself. His operations, exposed, cleanly, precisely. He didn't look at the screens immediately. He looked at her. "You've been busy," he said. Zora folded her hands lightly on the table. "Not really," she replied. "You made it easier than expected." The words were calm, unemotional, but they landed harder than any accusation. One of the officials spoke then, outlining details, movements tracked, communications intercepted, accounts linked across borders. The language was clinical, precise, undeniable. Still, he remained composed. Until a specific file appeared. Audio. Time-stamped. The restaurant. That night. His voice. Clear. Unfiltered. Every word he had spoken. Every assumption. Every mistake. The room went quiet again. Because this was the moment. He exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting once more to Zora. "That was your plan?" he asked. "From the beginning?" Zora shook her head slightly. "No," she said. A pause. "You just made it possible." The truth settled in. Not as shock, but as realization. Everything after that night, every move, every decision, had built on that single moment. The one he thought he controlled. He leaned back slightly, his expression tightening for the first time. "And now?" he asked. Zora held his gaze. Steady, unmoved. "Now," she said, "you answer for it." No raised voice. No anger. Just certainty. The kind that didn't need reinforcement. He let out a quiet breath, something close to a humorless laugh. "All of this," he said, glancing briefly at the screens, "because of a conversation?" Zora didn't blink. "No," she replied. A beat. "Because of what you revealed." Silence followed. Heavy. Final. The people around the table didn't move, didn't interrupt. They didn't need to, because the outcome had already been decided. He looked at her one last time. Really looked. Not as a server. Not as a mistake. But as the person who had turned a single moment into his downfall. And for the first time, there was no arrogance left in his expression. Only understanding. Zora leaned forward slightly, her voice calm, controlled, and impossibly clear. "You should have let me stay quiet." The words settled over the room like a verdict. Not dramatic. Not loud. But absolute. Because, in the end, that had been his only chance. And he had wasted it. In the weeks that followed, the headlines never mentioned her name. They talked about investigations, arrests, networks exposed. About power that had stretched too far, and finally broke. But Zora stayed where she had always been most effective. Quiet. Only now, it wasn't survival. It was control. Her life shifted in ways that no longer felt fragile. Hospital visits became routine, not desperate. Bills were handled before they became emergencies. Her brother stayed in school without interruption, his future no longer hanging by a thread. For the first time in a long time, Zora wasn't reacting to life. She was shaping it. Not loudly, not for recognition, but with precision. Because she had learned something most people never do. The quiet ones aren't weak. They're watching, learning, waiting. And when the moment comes, they don't need to raise their voice to change everything. They just need to speak once, at the right time. So tell me, what would you have done in her place? Would you have stayed silent, or taken the risk? And have you ever been underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong? Because sometimes, being overlooked isn't a disadvantage. It's the perfect position to win.